Well, I'm just going to start it up with the podcast because I'm recording it. So, this is going to be Dangerous Game Season 1, Episode 1. I have done like 30 something episodes, like 36, I think, is the total number of episodes of this damn podcast I've done. That being said, when I have done these podcasts in the past, there was a generalized theme. I every now and then had a co-host. This time around, I couldn't really find a co-host, and I just felt like I really wanted to talk about this topic because it is somewhat relevant in the current state of League of Legends. We are currently on patch 13.8, I believe, or 13.7, somewhere around there. So we're decent way into middle of season 13 at the time of this recording. Um, and we've run into the general topic once more that League of Legends is dying, and I am deciding to take a spin on this topic because it definitely feels like there's a massive decline happening in the community right now, and there's been a perceptive, an easily viewable decrease over the past year or two of population and popularity of League of Legends. So, in terms of this topic, what I really wanted to discuss was going to be about how Riot is somewhat to blame for this and the three main topics of why this is happening. Or at least from my perspective, there are three main reasons that I can kind of attribute to this decline in League of Legends. And let's just kind of jump into those. So, all three of those, just so we list them off real quick. Number one, League is too cerebral, meaning that you have to think too much about this game. This game requires way too much thought. Number two, Valorant is too brain dead. It's way too easy of a game by comparison. And I mean, they're different styles of games. So, I mean, obviously, one is going to end up being more thought provoking than the other. But just what Valorant has done to the atmosphere, the game genre that it is a part of, the specific tactical shooter genre, is way too easy by comparison. So this kind of helps hurt League of Legends. And then lastly, it comes down to the concept that the amount of money that has to be spent in this game for this game at the highest level has really made it difficult for lower levels to kind of build up. So let's start off with the kind of easiest claim. I think is going to be the idea that Riot has way too much money invested at the top end and not enough at the low end. So when we look at a lot of esports, we kind of like to look at the grassroots beginnings of a lot of these esports. StarCraft happened to be the biggest esport in the world at one point, and it had a lot of grassroots beginnings. Even when you look back into MLG tournaments for Halo and Call of Duty way back in the day, there was grassroots tournaments that popped up initially, which is what stemmed the influx of people into the higher levels of said competition. So when you look at League of Legends grassroots, you go back to the Just for LoL tournaments that happened on the weekends online. You go back to the Intel series that happened to start picking it up. Dream hacks, you just saw convention halls with these tournaments starting to pop up. Well, pretty early on into that series, Riot started making sure that they were kind of at the helm of creating these big tournaments. And roughly probably about season 2, season 3, Riot really kind of about season 3 is where Riot really started pushing out international tournament. Now note there were these tournaments that kept popping up. IAM San Jose is one that comes to mind for a lot of people. Probably that's where TSM there's some infamous things that happened there. TSM beat a Korean team, and that was unheard of. We still had some of these tournaments up until probably about season 5. And about season 5 is where everything really died away. But season 3 is where Riot really started trying to take a hold on everything. And this is where, by season 5, season 6, Riot is starting to put money into the game at a shockingly high level outside of just the world, just worlds. And by the time that the LCS pops around a few years later, Riot has strangleholded everybody else out of the top level, but has not incentivized anybody to go for the lower level, right? So prior to the LCS, we had relegation series, which allowed anybody and their friends basically to make a challenger team, make it run into the challengers, and then you get to play against if you win all of that, you get to play against the worst LCS teams. And you have a chance to then beat them and take their spot, which really added in this idea of any 5 group of friends that were good enough could make a team and get there. So there wasn't a whole lot of money needed for that type of motivation. But that wasn't very monetary. It wasn't very friendly to like venture capitalists and making money. And Riot has always been about making money. I don't know if anybody ever realizes this. They are a company, and as much as they love people and as much as they love their fan base and as much as they need us to be able to make that money, they have to look at money as a priority to them more so than what services the idea of fans, lofty goals, right? So keeping up this idea that anybody could make it in really doesn't promote the ideas that this is a competitive scene. Relegations doesn't really make it feel competitive. The only reason relegations work in something like soccer, in like the Bundesliga over in Germany, is because there is a secondary feeder league that is also trying to be as competitive as possible. And every one of those teams is trying to figure out if they could find the next breakout players to make a big team, to make a run, and then become a team that stands out in that area. And then on top of that, they have geolocation that adds into the area, into the fixing some of those problems. I don't think geolocation helps League of Legends. A lot of nerds aren't, necessarily going to be like, oh yeah, the Houston team, that's my team, right? Like, you might find some of that, but it doesn't fix the fundamental issues that there is just no real way for people to move from the lower level and lower division leagues, such as like a high school or a college or just amateur leagues, into League of Legends higher end. Because even the secondary league, the NACL as it is now, prior to that it was the challengers teams, and then prior to that there was the amateur teams as well. There hasn't been a great way for people to move up the ranks. When you look at LEC, when you look at Korea, when you look at China, these 3 regions have a very strong secondary scene, and they're supported by the people there. The problem is when Riot has tried to promote the NACL, which isn't very much, but when they've tried to promote it, nobody watches it. They get 3,000 people, 4,000 people, which is nowhere near enough to support that league. It's kind of like comparing the NBA to the WNBA. The NBA is supporting itself. The WNBA relies on the NBA to support it. And in very similar fashion, that is what's going on with NACL. And a large part of this is there's 2 big reasons. There's 2 big reasons why that league is failing. And one of those reasons is that Riot is not putting a lot of money into it, because it's a money sink, much like how the WNBA would be a money sink to try to promote it and get it up there, and it's a gamble. It's just such a raw gamble that Riot has no reason to put more money into it than they already are. Secondly, Riot wants to control it, and so there's probably enough dedicated people out there. There's probably a strong grouping of people that would love to be able to run that, or would love to be able to run collegiate, or love to be able to run high school. But Riot wants to control their IP. They want to control the identity of their game and their competition. And so because of this, we're running into an issue where Riot has so much control over it that they're causing damage to it because they're not relinquishing enough of that control. I had a very similar situation with one of my jobs recently. One of the jobs that I had recently, I was given the power to be able to do refunds for customers. That being said, I did not have the authority to give refunds for customers. So we end up in this problem where it's like, oh yeah, look, like I can give you a refund, but I have to wait until my manager tells me I can. There's no reason that I should be having to wait for this. I can make the judgment call. I've been here, I've been working this. I could make this judgment call, but I'm going to get in trouble if I make this judgment call because my boss has not told me I can do it. This is very much what's happening with the high school scene, the collegiate scene, and even NACL. right? There's so many dedicated, passionate individuals that would love to help grow these scenes and could have great ideas to do it, but Riot is not giving them the permission. They may hire some of these people. For instance, high school is ran through PlayVS throughout most of the country. PlayVS is not a bad company. I like PlayVS. I've talked to their guys, but they are a company first, and their goal is to grow their network to make money. I mean, most companies, that is their goal, but they don't have that true passion for building this into a League of Legends ecosystem. It's just another game that's a part of the PlayVS ecosystem. It's another way for PlayVS to pull in some money, right? Like, they're not doing anything to promote kids to play League of Legends. They're not trying to push League of Legends in any way. They're just there to be the person to facilitate it in case kids decide to play League of Legends. So Riot's not promoting it to somebody that's young, so the population's getting older. But even if we look at college, is there enough people to support college? And currently, there still is enough people to play the game and support the college ecosystem. But here's some big misnomers. Nobody understands that you don't have to be that good to be in the college system. Plat is the general average in most of these college teams is probably plat, maybe diamond. And most silver golds can probably make platinum. Now, getting past platinum is a struggle point for a lot of players, and even some people that make it past platinum aren't all that good. So you don't actually have to be a challenger prospect to be in the college system. We are not at a level in the college system that it is actually semi-pro. You don't have that in most of the schools. There's some top schools that have this. This is not a commonality across every school. My school is trying really hard to get one Masters player to join us, and the only reason we're really trying that hard to get the Masters player to join us is just because that potentially maybe can get us more players that are higher level. But like, if he doesn't join us, then we're going to be a plat diamond, maybe a plat gold, plat diamond average. Like, it's not, we're not like a team that's going to be contesting C9 for a title. You don't have to be that good to be in college. Yet Riot doesn't promote that. Riot doesn't try to tell people, look, you can go out and join these communities. Riot doesn't do anything to service the high school, the college, which then doesn't help them service the NACL. Because guess what feeds into the NACL? People coming from high school, people coming from college, thinking there's a next progression for them. But to get into the NACL, you yourself have to have an insane amount of passion. And then on top of that, all of the onus is on you to then prove to these teams you deserve a spot. And then on top of that, you then need to hope that you can grow in this ecosystem that is still not really developed for you to grow in, by the way. A lot of these teams are just phoning it in. They're giving a spot because they have to have a spot. And a lot of them are pushing to not have this spot. And so the teams are dispassionate about building their players. The players become dispassionate. So guess what? Our ecosystem for growth and our ecosystem for gaining players into the system is breaking down. So Riot's stranglehold on their IP is a large part of this, right? If Riot gave the reins over and let it just be an ecosystem that developed itself, maybe they give out support. Maybe they do what they used to do with old TeamSpeak tournaments and they offer prizing for people that are just participating, just competing. What does it cost Riot to give out RP points? Well, if they give out any RP, they could have been charging money for that RP. But what happens if they just give that RP? Does that cost Riot anything? Well, fundamentally, it really doesn't. It's like giving out, it's the ability, they have the ability to print Monopoly money to gain growth in their scenes. And they're not doing it. It doesn't cause like an inflation price on RP. RP has a set monetary value that they get to set. So if they're giving out this RP and it has that set monetary value, it doesn't dilute the monetary value. It just encourages people like, oh, look, Riot's giving us cash prizes, but it's not real cash, right? Like, it does not hurt Riot at all to be able to get out RP prizes to convince people to start getting into League of Legends, right? This is something that they could do. This is an easy marketing scheme they could do. The issue with it is, right, like, oh, but what if Smurfs start being able to do this, right? Like, it's just to say this is a new player incentive program, right, where you create a League of Legends account, you have to play until level 30, and if you do so, you get all champions unlocked by level 30. How does that hurt Riot? How does that hurt their bottom line, right? So you play to level 30, and once you're level 30, all champions unlock for you. All current champions unlock for you. Why does that hurt Riot's monetary value? How many people are actually spending hundreds of dollars to buy every champion? Does that happen? I don't have the logistics for that, but I can't imagine that that's how they make most of their money. Their money comes from skins, and if people have to spend that much time unlocking characters, that is a gate that they're blocking. And this is kind of a tangent. This is tangential. This is just an idea of how to convince the community to grow naturally. Is small incentives like this that don't necessarily hurt Riot's bottom line by that much, that they're not taking. If they want to have this much control, you then have to then take into consideration that you need to put in more back into this community, because they're not putting in anything. They're expecting the community to continue just giving them money, giving them money, giving them money, and it's just going to grow organically. But right now we're hit a point where that organic growth has kind of petered off, because there's other games that are competing with Riot. There's other games that are competing with the youth's attention. So if that's the case, you need to be able to get their attention back. And the way you do that is incentivize them to play your game. So if you tell them, hey, you're going to unlock every champion and you get a free skin at level 30. Okay, one free skin's not going to kill Riot's thing. Give them a freaking skin shard that's just, or a skin permanent, like mystery skin permanent. How does that hurt Riot's bottom line? It doesn't. It actually incentivizes these people to play. It incentivizes people even to just make new accounts. And they might then spend money on said new accounts. So there's things that, what the whole point of this tangent was to prove that there's things that Riot can do that they aren't doing. That doesn't necessarily hurt their bottom line. It actually incentivizes them to gain more money from this. And it makes sense that they should grow these lesser leagues that they aren't paying a whole lot of attention to. But because they've put so much focus into the top end, and they're still so blind to the fact that they're trying to make the top end work, it's because they haven't made a bottom down to feed into the top end. The top end will not continue to work unless the foundation is set properly. And Riot has already screwed up foundational set, so you need to pivot and make a new foundation, and then you can try to shift your mobile home that you have built, that is the LCS. The LCS is essentially a shady-ass mobile home that they've built on no foundation and have left there with cinder blocks under the wheels. So now what you got to do is you build a foundation, you move it over there, you can knock the wheels off, and you can make it grow from this point on. So that is the first one that we've talked about, right? That is the first big thing that Riot could do, is that if they're going to control their IP, they need to be working on the foundation of this IP, because you now work top down and it's not working. So you need to then refocus, recenter, stop focusing so heavily on the LCS. The LCS is doing okay in its current state. You're not going to continue to grow it though. So if you want to grow it, you need to go look at how you can build below a new spot beneath it that you can then prop it onto. So the second thing, and then the other two topics that we have that are why League of Legends is failing, is that League of Legends is too cerebral, meaning you have to think too much, and that Valorant is too easy. And so let's kind of explain these two topics together, because I think that they really intertwine to cause a big part of some of the decline that Riot's facing in League of Legends. So when we look at the previous games that League has made, or that Riot has made outside of League of Legends, they made TFT. They made Legends of Runeterra. Legends of Runeterra is doing its own thing and it's doing fine. Its profitability, I imagine, is fine. They don't really need to grow that community to a large extent. It's a card game and people like it, and it's a collectible card game. It's not a trading card game. So it's working in its own ecosystem, and I imagine people enjoy it still. I never really got into it, but what it does do is it ties its lore to League of Legends lore, which then allows people from League of Legends to be like, oh, I enjoy the lore, I want to go play this game. Or vice versa, somebody's like, oh, I played Legends of Runeterra, I really enjoyed the lore, let me go see the game it's based off of. And there's some interchangeable players in between, I imagine. I don't imagine they hold a high retention rate to each other, but there's some interactability there. Same thing with TFT. Difference is TFT's in the League client, so it's actually pretty easy to be like going from TFT to be like, you know what, we're going to play some League of Legends, right? And while these games are all different, they all share a very common thing in that they're all oriented to thinking strategically. League of Legends, you have to plan strategically. You have to play strategically. I was about to say devolved, but it's evolved into a game where it requires so much team coordination, so much thought process, so much ability for you and your team to coordinate to beat the opposing teams. That it's a very cerebral game. You have to think about how are you going to itemize, how are you going to be able to beat the opposing team, how do you need to adjust your play style to focus on how you want to succeed versus how the enemy team wants to succeed. Are you going to be able to work as a team to draft differently, to counterpick people? Are you going to be able to contest every objective, or do you need to let X many objectives go until a certain point where you can then hit an item breakpoint and fight things? These are big questions, right? Like, these aren't easy questions for a brand new player to answer. Some of you players that might be watching this, some of you that have watched these things and played League for a long time might think to yourselves, oh, that's a pretty easy thing for me to answer. You do X, Y, Z, depending on the situations you're in. But that also brings up the fact that you have to think about this situationally. If you're a different champion, you're going to respond to it differently. There's so much thought process that goes into playing a game of League of Legends that it's very daunting for new players. On top of that, they have to manage, well, what champion do I want to play? And there's no way for them to really truly test these champions super well without, the shards. You have to get a shard, and it's like, oh, look, I RNG'd into the shard of the champion I wanted to try. Let me try him out. But then if you try them out and you like them, then you have to figure out how to get the blue essence to buy them. I think it's a whole mess. And I mean, just the client side aspects of complexity of what you're adding in to consideration for players is very difficult for players to actually be like, oh yeah, you know what, I want to get into League of Legends because I don't know. I don't honestly know a reason why a new player would want to get into League of Legends other than they've heard it's a fun game and that it looks cool. And I still stand by that is exactly what League is. It's a fun game that looks cool, but it's a hard game. It is just thematically very difficult as a game itself. And then on top of that, like I said, these outlying factors of stuff, even in the client, what you have to consider in. I mean, they've made runes way simpler than it used to be, so that was great of them to do that. But you have 160 something, 165-ish champions that people have to select from. They have to understand what the 5 different roles are. They have to understand how their champion functions in that role, if they can function in that role. And they have to understand what their role is. So, I mean, these are things that you have to do before you're even into the game. And then, let alone, like, the things that we talked about in the game. So the game itself has just become so much of a thought process that there's a lot of barrier to entry. And this is a hard thing to be able to solve, other than being able to be like, well, you know what, we're not going to charge that much for champions anymore, right? Like, they keep doing price reductions and stuff to make it easier for people to be able to get the champions. That's kind of neat. I think that I mentioned it earlier, that they run an incentive program where it's like, hey, you get to level 30 and we unlock, you get maybe you get 20 free unlocks. You get to choose the champions you think look cool when you unlock them. Maybe they just do a mode where it's just like, all right, screw it, like, all champions are unlocked in this normals mode, and you can play every champion, but in order to play them in ranked, you have to unlock them, right? Like, that would make more sense to me, right? Like, in normals, that all champions are unlocked in blind pick or something, and that gets people to play blind pick, right? Because that's, where they get to try out their champions, or maybe even make it normals draft mode as well. I think there's ways that Riot could do it to lessen the problem of people not understanding champions or not getting to play champions first, spending money and feeling bad that they don't like them afterwards. You have to do more, at least, to soften that blow. On top of that, you need to make the barrier of entry lessened. They're already trying to do this with recommended items, recommended runes, and that's great and all, but I don't think it's enough. And for on the flip side of it, when we're looking at something like Valorant, where I said Valorant is too easy of a game, let's look at this genre that Valorant falls into. Valorant falls into a tactical shooter game genre. So tac shooters are known for tactics. I mean, that's what tactical is. They're a tactics-based shooter game. You have to know lineups. You have to know callouts. You have to know how each of your teammates function. Do you have an entry fragger? Do you have an opper? Do you have an individual that's playing lurk? How does your executes look? What's the timers we're going out on? There are some questions to ask in this game, and when you compare it to CS, Counter-Strike is a very thought-heavy game with shooting elements to it. That being said, you can play like a monkey in Counter-Strike, but if the enemy team is positioned properly and knows how to hold angles properly, then they will just destroy you if you're just running in and trying to gun them. As long as they can shoot bullets, it will work up into a point. But once you reach a certain point where players can actually shoot again, it's just done. In terms of Valorant, there is no need to understand utility to its fullest. You don't have to know lineups. They've made it so that lineups are optional, right? Like the kind of idea that Valorant has made is like you don't need to know smoke lineups. You can just place your smoke in a place. You don't need to know how to use a flash. You just throw the flash, and if it's near anybody, it'll blind them. So when you're looking at Valorant compared to CS, Valorant's utility usage is way, way easier. On top of that, it's supposed to be a tactical shooter, which means that you need to do precise gunplay. And it's become a meme. That terminology is a very big meme in the Valorant scene, which is precise gunplay, because people can just run around and gun people down. I mean, you can do that in CS as well, but it's just not as common because if you're good with precise gunplay in CS, it's rewarding, and you 100% of the time win the duels of somebody trying to spray and pay. Meanwhile, in Valorant, because there is an RNG aspect similar to CS:GO 1. Or CS 1.6, which is that you could be pixel perfect with your placement, and there's still like a 0.05% chance it misses. There is an RNG aspect that you can just not hit your shot, and that feels bad. But anyhow, this isn't to go in depth on Valorant or anything like that, but it's to showcase that there is a lot more of a fun aspect to Valorant that is because they are trying to make it an easier variant of the genre that it is in. And the reason they did this, the whole point behind doing this was to then pull people over that were from CS, so there's enough of the CS elements to get the people that wanted to play CS:GO, but on a better server with better responsive devs. It's to pull them over, but it's also to incentivize the kids that played Fortnite. It's to incentivize the kids that played easier shooters overall. Mechanically, Fortnite had a lot of complexities to it, but in terms of the shooting element, it was easy. So you water down the shooting element, you water down the utility usage, and this is how you pull from both pools of people to pull them over. But the game is so easy that kids don't have to think. Many of my buddies, who I have a couple of guys on our Valorant team at the college I go to that are immortal, both of them, and along with another guy that was immortal that had been on the team. All three of them unanimously said you don't need to understand the game to get to Ascendant. You just have to shoot better than the other team. That tells you the game is fundamentally easier than in Counter-Strike, because once you reach a certain level in Counter-Strike, and I would say it's probably around MG2, Master Guardian 2, maybe DMG, where you really, really need to start actually knowing your smokes or knowing timings and knowing where people are going to push. What are the angles that people generally hold? What are the call outs? Like, these are things you have to know by this level, which is like halfway through the levels or halfway through the ranks. You need to know this. But for Valorant, you don't even need to start beginning to do that until you're already on the third highest rank in the game. Like, that's insane to me. Well, that doesn't bleed over to League of Legends well. There's no transferability of that. Valorant, they expect to be able to just be good at it. Their average player base is still stuck pretty low, which is kind of weird. But there's a lot of people that can move into gold and plat in Valorant that can't do that in League of Legends. Because in League of Legends, you have to think, no matter what in like League, you can play until about gold with brain completely off. You could probably play all the way to diamond, brain completely off, but you have to be mechanically so good at the game you can't make a single mistake. Mistakes are much more punishable in League of Legends because of the style of game that it is. You know, your mistake in Valorant might have happened, but if as long as you don't keep making that mistake round and round and round and round, like you have to repeat the mistake so many times in Valorant for it to actually be punishable. In League of Legends, you only have to make that mistake once because of just how the game is structured and how the game plays. So kids, you know, there's an argument that has been made to me recently that you can't compare the games. They're two different styles of games, but that's just not how it works in the mind of gamers, right? You're going to compare apples to oranges. You're going to compare, you know, tomatoes and bananas. Like, these are things that should not be comparable. They don't go in the same thing. You don't use them for the same reasons, but you're going to compare them because they're both in the same category of things, right? You're going to compare fruits together. You know, somebody likes apples more than they like oranges. They might be different flavor profiles. They may not be the same type of thing, but you're going to have a preference. And so for developing a preference for League of Legends, how do you develop that preference? Well, you have to be a cerebral player. You have to think. You have to want to think. And you now at this point have to kind of be a team player more so. Like, I mean, you can be an individual player. Obviously, there's a lot of streamers that are, but you have to think from a team's perspective, like, what is the strategy? And then on top of that, you have to think of, okay, if I don't have somebody playing the strategy the way they should, how do I win? What do I do? Blah, blah, blah. And you have to think through so much of the game on so many different levels that it's way harder. And so that level of difficulty is a barrier to entry. And then Riot has created a game that they've taken that barrier of entry away. That cerebral thought is not a necessity in Valorant. It is something, it is a necessity for top Valorant, but it is not a necessity for all of Valorant. And so when you compare apples to oranges in this situation, what game as a 14-year-old kid would you rather play? The one where you're going to have to basically do homework and research and study, or the game that's just going to be, I go and click heads and people die? Haha. Look at me, I'm so good. I mean, when I think back to my childhood, when I think back to my adolescence, right? When I think back to when I was in middle school and high school, the games that appealed to me were the games that I could go around shooting people and being a freaking absolute menace. Call of Duty, Halo, Battlefield, Battlefront. Like, they were the original Battlefronts, not the newest ones. The newest ones I haven't gotten to play. I don't know if they're any good, but like, those were the games I played. Shooters. These were that is what had appealed to me in my environment. And then, I mean, that is a North America kind of feeling, right? Like, specifically US especially. Those are the super popular games here because culturally we have learned that we want instant gratification. The things that I have to put in extra work for just didn't appeal to me. And a lot of youth nowadays that play video games aren't going into sports. You know why they don't go into sports? Because they don't have a competitive drive like that. They want to be good and they think they're good at something. And if they are good at it, they'll pursue it. But the second they start hitting adversity to it, they don't have the coping skills to actually push for it. So the barrier to entry is a big gate for these kids. Once they get into League of Legends, right? Like, players that start playing League of Legends and actually like the game find it hard to leave. They might stop playing for a while, but they inevitably come back and they're like, God, why am I playing this game again? I've seen it so many times where they leave and then they come back and they start playing the game again, and then all of a sudden they're hooked just like they were 10 years ago. It is a game that is so rewarding once you start understanding it. But the barrier, those things that we're talking about, those barriers to entry, the too many champions that you have to choose from, not getting a tutorial that doesn't, I mean, we didn't even talk about this, but the tutorial doesn't really teach you how to play the game. You don't run into a situation, you don't have a generalized understanding of how to play the game until you've played like 100 games at least. Like, there's so much that you have to do to get a grasp on the game. And then there's so many things that Riot could fix, like Smurfs and stuff, that prevent new players from wanting to play, bots, stuff like that. But the biggest thing is that there's actually just system things that make it more difficult. Having to choose all these champions and not knowing how they play is one of them. Having to basically go research how to play the game is a big barrier to entry, right? Like for me, I've avoided playing certain games like Counter-Strike, for instance. I like Counter-Strike, but I'll never get a Faceit client because that's just a barrier to entry to me. Likewise, Riot barrier to entry is that I have to learn all these champions. If I hadn't started playing back when there was only 60 champions, I don't know if I would actually have gotten into this game. I've fallen in love with this game and I love the concept of it and I love the genre of it. But that's because I've played it for so long. For somebody that's new, I can see why it's so daunting. I can see why it's so inaccessible. There's so much you have to learn, and the onus is completely on you. The game does not explain itself. The game is not built for new players' friendliness. It's built upon all these different things that have become fundamentals of the game, and these fundamentals are not easy to learn because nobody's teaching them anymore. I mean, there's no way to learn them in the game itself. You have to learn it by playing it and watching other people and emulating people. And people have gotten so good that even the lower level players, even your average, so if you look at like an average silver player nowadays, which is the average rank in the game, and you compare them to the golds and plats of season 2 and 3, they're probably plat level in season 2. They're probably plat level in season 3. Like, I am a perennial plat player, and at this point, if I played back in seasons 1 and 2, I'm betting you I'm somewhere in the same level as freaking like Dyrus in them. Like, I'm not that great of a player, but like when you look now back to what people knew then, like I am now so much more knowledgeable and so much more skilled at the game than the players of the first years of the game. Not all of them. There's some of them that manage to be freaking monsters. But the only reason some of them have kept up, for instance, Faker, is a completely different tangent, but I did want to talk about this at some point. The reason Faker is the GOAT is that he has survived this game through so many iterations of this game, and he has maintained that level of play, and he's maintained the ability to be the top 4, top 5 mid laners in the most competitive region in the world since season 3, guys. If we look back at it now, even season 3, I would easily be in diamond. I would easily be top of diamond with my current skill level. Could I currently now beat some of the junglers from then in NA? 100%. 100%. I have no doubt that my current skill level is high enough to have beaten what they were at back then. But in large part of this, that is because the game has continued to grow, and I've continued to grow with the game. And though I've maintained my same level of skill through all this time, like rank-wise, I am the same level, I am still so much of a better player than I was just a few years ago. It's just that the barrier to get higher keeps moving higher, right? Or arguably. Some people will argue that it's less, but there is an innate amount of, this knowledge learning curve is getting higher because there's more being added to the game. There's more things you need to know about the game to be an adequately good player. So because that's compounding, the only reason I'm able to maintain playing the game is because I already had a start point before it got to this complexity. New players are not going to want to come into that complexity because they have to learn it all at once. And that is a very daunting task. So ultimately, guys, as we're approaching the end of the podcast episode today, we are at a point in League of Legends history that the game gatekeeps itself. It is so high, to kind of recap our 3 points. The game is so complex that it pushes new players away from wanting to learn it because there's so many things that Riot could do to ease that entry, that barrier of entry, that they just haven't done and won't do for whatever reason. So new players feel too afraid to actually start it and join into it. secondly, they created another game that is a watered down version of the genre that it is from. And that is not a bad thing, but it showcases that they have an understanding of how to do this. But it also is pulling away some of that younger audience because it is fundamentally an easier game and it's much more instantly rewarding than League of Legends. And so that is hurting League of Legends' ability to attract younger audience when you have a game like Valorant that has a lot more instant gratification built into the game itself. And then lastly, the first topic we talked about, the very foundation of the game is built upon the fact that Riot has complete and autonomous control of how the game is played at the highest level. And because of this, they are spending so much money and so much time to make that high level be compelling and advertiser friendly, and is trying to use that to encourage people to like the game. Yet they're not putting any time, they're not putting any money and resources into building the foundation beneath it to make sure that they can continue to have people coming in at that top level, right? So what Riot could have done, examples that we'd given, were the fact that they could support the high school leagues, they could support college leagues, or they can leave it open to allow them to grassroots themselves, opposed to just putting a roadblock in the way of, to be a collegiate team, to get the benefits of being a collegiate team, you have to participate in this one collegiate league. To be a high school affiliated League of Legends high school, you have to participate in this one tournament organizers tournament, right? They have done these things with Play VS and CLOL, and I love CLOL, but like, it is technically a gatekeep from allowing all these colleges to grow and flourish and grassroots themselves. And so because they're not allowing these grassroots communities to build up, they're actually harming them by then just not helping them. So you have to choose one way or the other. You have to let them do it organically, or you're going to have to put time and effort, more so than you currently are, to build these up so that they can then pay back dividends into the upper echelon that you're trying to promote. So ultimately, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I'm going to try to release an episode weekly now. I know I've promised this in the past, and I have failed utterly, but now I am also more motivated into League of Legends once more than I have been in quite a while. And if you've kind of paid attention to my YouTube channel, I've actually started putting out more content overall recently. I wouldn't say it's all good content, but it's content nonetheless. So if you enjoy these episodes, guys, keep an eye out. I guess I'll be trying to do them every Tuesday. But thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode. And until then, have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day.